Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to wherever you are in the world tonight. Welcome to RCI Mondays, which is, of course, British Masters Round 3 at, as you can see, a very soggy Donington Park in Derby. We have 1 hour of the most British GT3 racing coming to you today. I'm your lead commentator for tonight, John Dalton, and alongside me in the booth is Jesse Lee. Welcome.
Yes, hello, John. Hello, everybody at home. This is typical British weather, and it's just about time that we got into it during a thing called the British Masters Championship. What an interesting championship we've had up to this point. A lot of players still involved in it at the top of the table. Today, though, will mark the halfway point into the season. John, the prevailing thought I continue to have is somebody might not win the championship today, but there's likely going to be a few that are going to lose it.
Certainly so, Jesse. I mean, last time out, we found ourselves at Silverstone for round 2, where we saw McLaren dominance with Nico Koizma taking an outstanding win in pro from Ben Mullard, who put up an excellent fight for the full hour of the race, and also Daniel Austin in the Aston Martin V8 Vantage that came in third. Unfortunately, some bad luck towards the end of the race for him. In silver, we did see great pace from Matt Campbell, making excellent progress up the field into the tangle with Daniel Austin, gave him a penalty, setting him back to position 2 and giving Tom Shipston the win in silver. So it is all to play for. The top 4 drivers in pro are within 10 points of each other, and silver are finding themselves a little bit more spaced out, but again, it's still all to play for, even this part of the season. So very interesting conditions today as we come towards the end of practice. We see the McLarens in 1 and 2 with Austin's in 3rd in the Aston Martin. And we have a Bentley up in the mix today, up in P4. So a little bit odd to see that with the 413. Sorry, not the 413, the number 9. And speaking of Bentleys, Jordan Daly there stopped on circuit as he rounds towards the final turn. One man here, Jan Yao in the Pro class. Somebody who we normally see a little bit higher up than P20th, Jesse. So going to be interesting to see what he can do in qualifying. As we flick sessions, the weather remains the same. A lovely, typical British summer. Jesse, how do you feel the weather is going to play into tonight's results?
Well, it's going to be major because here you always have the prevailing issue of track limits. You always have an issue where just staying on the racetrack, it's an old circuit after all. The weather is not going to help that. Going to get down to the old hairpin. You're going to have cars going off left, right, and center. It's just the nature of the beast. And also, too, talk about the manufacturers involved. They're all British. They all handle completely differently in the dry versus the wet. That could be a game changer for them as well.
Yeah, definitely so. We see the McLaren, as we see on screen here, from Nico Koizma. Normally a fairly balanced car in the wet, never really has outright raw pace, as Nico goes very, very sideways at the top of the hill here. Conditions catching him out a little bit on these low pressure tyres with low temperatures, but eager to get a move on and keep that lead on the qualifying lap as the Bentley of King Mage chases behind in the number 9. Lights ablaze as they come into the S's. These guys are probably want to distance themselves a little bit as King Mage looks to make a move on Nico. Maybe this early on in the qualifying isn't normally a thing you do. So we're going to see the train here start spreading out. We're going to see probably the Bentley back up, give them some room, and falling down the order to the rest of the guys who are all tightly bunched together through the hairpin. As we look to the man here on screen, Nico Koizma taking a lovely wide line into the last turn. Set yourself up for a beautiful slingshot out of the last turn, jumping on the power super hard as we jump on board with Nico Koizma for his first flying lap. You want to be getting the car as far over to the left as you can for the pit lane. Very late apex in the first corner, a little bit misleading normally, and then you want to jump on the power nice and early for a maximum exit out of the first turn down towards the Craner curves. These corners normally in the dry, absolutely flat, probably in the wet. You're going to have to do a little bit of a lift there. We saw Nico making as he heads down towards the old hairpin. Very careful on these curves, probably going to be holding a lot of moisture. The painted surface isn't going to be too grippy as he clatters through the bollards under what would have been Starkey's Bridge, but it is there no more, unfortunately. Heading up to the top of the hill, turn 7, McLean, you want to get it nice and tight in here. Again, another late apex corner where you want to maximise your exit to try and get the best run up into turn 8, which is Coppice, as you can get. A little bit of inside curb, not too much though. Very easy to unsettle the car. You've seen Nico soaring away at the wheel on corner exit there. Not a very stable looking McLaren we're seeing here in the wet. Maybe the front engine cars might be a little bit of a better pick, but heading down into the S's, very brave corner. You want to try and tuck it as much to the left as you can to then straighten it up for the jump over the curb. But again, the wet catching out Nico, as we're seeing a lot of opposite lock coming in from the McLaren and into the Melbourne hairpin. Turn 10, typically a very good place to pass, very wide entry, but does tighten up towards the apex. Want to get the best run that you can again out of this corner down towards turn 11 of Goddard's, as we see Nico here sizing up maybe the outside line, but deciding to take the inside line. Is obviously going to be the fastest route round a lap, and you want to take that wide line for when you're kind of beginning your lap, as Nico Koizma comes across the line to set a 1:35.5. So Jesse, looking not very stable for Nico on that lap, looking like he's fighting the wheel a lot. I say, and have to watch these other McLarens to see how they perform alongside him.
Yeah, he's not going to be the only car that's going to be dealing with that. In fact, I suspect the majority of the cars are going to be dealing with that. All you need to do is look at the track conditions, and it tells you the story. There's the shiny part on either side of the racing line, and that tells you there's only one line out there that you're going to want to be on. And even on that, you can't have issues, just like what we saw there at the exit of Redgate. It was at the 171, having issues going through there. And that's how easy it is to ruin your lap. And well, but luckily it is a longer qualifying session than some of these drivers might be accustomed to here on RCI TV. Well, no surprise out in front, Austin's with a 35.050, the 413 reigning supreme in this championship, and that has continued today despite the weather that we are dealing with. Mullard in the 77 is a quarter of a second back on them, and Fox goes to the top of the table for the high silver crowd. That's an incredible lap from the driver of the 314.
So McLaren's looking typically very, very strong here at the early stages, Jesse. We got Austin's in the vantage ahead on a 135, as we see Nico Koizma firing a time to the top there. But McLaren's looking very strong. A lot of positions taken up by them, as Wheatsall also takes P2 in the 199 with an excellent lap there. But Nico Koizma does remain your provisional pole sitter. So a big block of McLarens with an Aston Martin in between, and then another big block of McLarens. All the Astons bunched together just outside the top 10, Jesse, with a few Bentleys towards the mid-teens area. So McLaren looking like we saw at Silverstone, maybe to be the dominant pick here early on.
Yeah, I was actually talking to some of the drivers before the race today. They were sort of kidding, not kidding about the car choice here. A lot of drivers taking the, I think, what they assume to be the easy route with the McLaren, and it certainly is one of the fastest cars in ACC, so why wouldn't you? Other teams have elected to not do that, this being one of them, Daniel Austin's in the 413. It certainly hasn't done them any harm. A 34.380 resets the quickest lap in qualifying. Koizma down to second place, already finds themselves nearly 4/10 off of the pole position, just like that. An incredible lap from Daniel Austin's.
Yeah, Daniel Austin's has always been that guy that absolutely nails the first half of qualifying before all of his opponents seem to figure out what's going on and start finding their time to clamber their way up the board. Stephen Van Kampen here in the number 35 in the Pro Class, currently resides in P18, rounding the last corner here to run towards the line. Very short finish line. It's very early on the straight. Jumps himself up into P10 to be the third best Aston, just inside the top 10 there, with a few more seconds to gain. I think Stephen Van Kampen is going to be making some progress. We saw an excellent show from him at Alton Park, along with this man, Daniel Austins, who literally took the pole position and just drove away. So looking at the early times going on here, Nico Kumpu has nearly bested Daniel Austins in the Aston Martin. Apologies on that, not the McLaren. Nico is, of course, an Aston driver. Just so used to seeing the McLarens kind of firing themselves up the top of the board, as Daniel Austins here looks to be kind of up on his time coming into the last corner. Hopefully he doesn't get held up by this minty green 720S ahead of him. Possibly he can use a little bit of slipstream, maybe coming out of the last corner to try and maximize his exit. Does improve into a 134.1 as we see Austin's pull over to the side there, possibly jumping back to the pit lane to take some fresh wets and possibly another load of fuel. This man here, Ben Mullard, provisionally sits in P3. Again, another driver with an excellent showing at Silverstone. Drove a really good race all the way up to the checker, so he is going to be a man certainly to watch out for in this race as well. Didn't have such a good stint at Alton Park, was typically very just outside the kind of top 3 battle all the time, but did show some very good pace in qualifying. It seems to be British Masters is one of those races that seems to lead itself quite well to good qualifying results, Jesse. It seems if you stick yourself on pole, you can literally drive away from the field sometimes.
Well, the best place obviously is to be on that front row. It gives you the best shot, doesn't it? And also, you consider the quality. This is the top split, obviously, of the British Masters Championship. So you have all the fast drivers in this split. And don't think just because they're high silver that they can't win these races. Certainly some of them are capable of doing so. And it's one of those deals where these are the best of the best that signed up for this championship. You know it's going to be tough. You've got a ton of names up there, all capable of winning races. Nico Kumpu, for instance, a 34.135, takes the top spot, 7 1,000ths quicker than Austin's time. Fox has reset their quickest time up to P3 overall and back to the provisional lead of the high silver class. The next round racing driver, absolutely flying. We saw Fox in the Diamond Drive Cup here on RCI TV, and they did well here as well. So this is no surprise to me that Fox is up there competing with everybody, not competing with their own class, competing with everybody, looking for a podium today.
Yeah, certainly would not be discounting these silver drivers out. We did see Matthew Campbell with an excellent run at Silverstone before tangling with Daniel Austins, which did unfortunately put him back a position into P2 in silver. Like you say, Nicole Fox has again proved herself in the Diamond Drive Cup. So some very big names in the silver class. I've just seen Tom Shipston down in P10. He is another one of my favourites on the cards for a win tonight. Another excellent showing from Tom at Silverstone, even battling with some of the pro guys in the mid stage of the race. So great to see these guys are able to put it to the pros, and it is just a learning curve, this game, and you will never ever kind of learn any more than racing with people of a higher skill level. When you're following in their slipstream, you could learn new lines, new braking points, new ways to attack a corner. You may learn how to use a curb that you never knew you could use before, or maximize your corner exit, or really learn how to use all of the track limits. So if you do want to be a part of this, of course, we do have sign-ups all the time over at racerci.com. Of course, check us out and put your name down for a few events. Pre-qualifying is open on a few of the events. We'll run through that later on. But for now, we turn our way back to the final 4 minutes of qualifying. This man here, Nico Kuizma, was a provisional pole sitter. However, currently resides down in P5, fighting the McLaren out of the S's down towards the Melbourne hairpin. Looking very good on his first couple of sectors. So going to be watching this man to the end to see how he fares. A little bit of understeer maybe through the hairpin, kind of a little bit of wheel spin coming out of the hairpin, and now down towards the final turn. Daniel Austins, I believe, ahead in the McLaren as he keeps it nice and tight. Bit of a wiggle on corner exit, wants to try and maximize as much of a straight line as he can towards the line. Nico Kuizma takes pole with a 1:33.790, the first driver to break into the 33s, other than Rachinov down in P2, who again could also challenge Nico for this pole. So still 3.5 minutes to go, Jesse. Anything can happen right now with this weather.
I can't imagine that this track is improving too much. I just think the drivers are getting a little bit more confident. Maybe they've made some adjustments as well to counteract the wet racetrack. One way or another, they're definitely picking up. They picked up more than a full second since this session started, and they're not done yet. 3 minutes left to play. I feel like there's a little bit left out there for some of the cars. Matt Campbell, the Flying Hellfish 260, looking to move their way up the high silver bracket here. And certainly he's on a flyer to do so. 2 turns left to go. Only Goddard's left to navigate. The traffic in front of them too far ahead to affect this lap. We're expecting an improvement down in P17, but I believe that is already in the top 5. Is right close to a couple of other drivers in their class and goes P2 for Matt Campbell. The Flying Hellfish car goes second. That was a 34.680. A very nice pickup. And on top of that, he gets a couple more laps to try it again.
Yeah, certainly so. With a little short lap here at 1 minute 33, still gives you a couple more attempts at a stab. And this man here, Daniel Austins, jumps himself up into P2 with a 133.792. so close at the front, Jesse. You literally can't separate the top 3 at the moment. This is going to be a crazy race if this pace continues.
2 1/1000ths off of the provisional pole is Daniel Austins. The AMR Daniel sim racing car is coming to play. They've been trading blows, and we haven't even turned a lap in the race yet. Don't forget about Rachinov in the 24 behind, less than a 10th behind. That is near as makes no difference in race trim. This is very close stuff. Every time we come to Donington, it's close. Today, it's super close. 2 1/1000ths of a second. You can't blink that quickly.
Yeah, it's a crazy time scale. I always think of racing as, imagine you and a friend agreed to meet at McDonald's. If you arrived a second later, your friend arrived, you would pretty much arrive at the same time. However, in racing, a second can mean so much, and that's what we have covering P1 all the way down to P1. But Mullard there putting an absolute flyer of a 133.6. Smashing the other guys completely out of the water there, Jesse. But this man here, Nico Kuizma, is looking very good as well on the first couple of sectors of his lap as he runs down into Gollard's. Daniel Austins ahead of him. Doesn't look to be improving, does Daniel? So we'll stick with Nico Kuizma as he takes a run to the line. Little bit of a wobble on exit. Fires himself up into pole with a 133.5, Jesse. These guys are just trading blows.
Okay, I've changed my mind. This track's definitely improving because they're improving hand over fist every single lap. That can only mean one thing. And did Ben Mullard come to the pit lane at the wrong time? They will take no further part in this session. Boardman goes P6 with a 34.032, their quickest lap. That was a nice improvement for the driver of the 66, the Grease Weasel Racing team. Ben Mullard will have to settle for whatever position he ends up in, and that's very much in doubt. You've got Austins and Rachinov right behind them. Will we see a big improvement from Wetzel and Boardman? Everybody else getting an extra lap. Grim Lilith coming to the line, and that was an improvement, a 35.075. Good enough to put that car inside the top 20 for the time being. Here is Alexander Wetzel, the supersonic 199 McLaren. It's going to have a little bit of traffic. Is the traffic getting out of the way? Yes, it is, as we head into the first hairpin. And that will be very much to Alexander's liking. One turn left, John. Don't mess it up here.
Yeah, sadly so. It's so frustrating as a driver when you see a Delta in the green, you turn one corner and then all of a sudden you blink and it's in the red. Super frustrating, but Weitzel here keeping it very clean in the 199 towards the line. He comes across the line, but no improvement, Jesse. Possibly not a valid lap there.
Very, very close stuff there. That was an invalidation for Wetzel. That will dampen, no pun intended, their hopes at starting a little bit closer to the front. A couple of cars still left to qualify or finish qualifying. Boardman was one of them, but I don't think they improved. What about Rachinov? Vinci Rachinov, the Madness car, will go P1, a 33.505 at the last possible moment. King Lee coming to the line, the best first name in sim racing, will finish up. Ethan Scott, the last car to come across the line, and they'll stick it in P11. Incredible qualifying on a wet racetrack. Qualifying, delivering. My goodness.
Yeah, absolutely crazy scenes there, Jesse. We saw The track improving time and time again with 26 cars circling on blocked wet Pirellis. It was always going to start with a dry line eventually, and it's just timing yourself to know that you've got another maybe 2 laps in the tank when the timer hits to that 3 minutes. You can still keep going. So some drivers timing it not so well, Mullard being one of them, maybe being caught out a little bit there on strategy, but nevertheless we know Mullard has the pace in him, so he's definitely going to be one to watch from that second row in P3.
He sure is. And we talked a little bit about how close the points championship has been thus far. Well, I think it's about time we show you what the points championship looks like. John, it is close in pro, very close.
Yeah, super close at the front. I mean, top 4 separated by less than 10 points. We have Daniel Austin's taking the lead at the moment with 39 points. 2 points behind him in P2 is Nico Kuizma. You then find a joint tie for third between Ben Mullard and Jordan Daly, 2 very capable drivers. Definitely want to be watching those guys. Nico Kumpu in P5 trailing not so far behind on 25 points. Rachinov in P6 with 23. We have Stephen Van Kampen, P7 with 18. P8, we find Lee King McGee with 15 points in the Bentley. In P9, we see Matthew Kingston Lee with unlucky 13. And down in rounding out your top 10, Alexander Witzel with 11. Flicking over to the next page, we see Jan Yeo here with 9 points in the AMR Aston. Right up behind him, John Eraser, 2 points behind in the 699. We then see Martin Lawrence in yesteryear's Bentley Continental from 2016 with 5 points. We then see Andy Boardman in P14 with 2 points. And then we see Justin van der Linden and Daniel Walker scoring 0. And I believe anybody with a line has signed out of the championship. Moving over to GT3 Silver, we see Tom Shipston in the more modern day Bentley with 37 points. Chasing behind him very closely indeed is Matt Campbell in the 260 with 34 points. We see Ray Becky in P3 with 29 points. We see Laurie McLaughlin from Scotland with 21 points in P4. Ethan Scott rounds out with 18 points. Joint tie with Bart Matcher, who is unfortunately not here tonight in the old school 650S. We then see Roskam joint with Niels Jun in P7 essentially. And then we see another tie between Alexander Borodai and Alan Knight, rounding out your top 10 with 13 points. Flicking over to the next page, a fellow Scot, George Kwiatkowski with 11 points. We then see our very own Grim Lilith with 9 points. Nicole Fox, not so far behind, with 5 points. We then see Daryl Sutcliffe with 3. And then we see 4 drivers even yet to score any points. Those being the 330, the 47 of Jake Boswell, the 46 of Les Stevenson, and the 123 McLaren. Anybody else with a line has, of course, signed out.
Well, it is very close. You mentioned when we came on air, John, that the points in the pro class are very, very close from the top to the bottom, a little bit more spread out in the high silver class. But there's a ton of ties in both of the championships thus far. Keep in mind, there's 6 rounds in this championship. This is the 3rd round. Everybody gets a drop round. What is a drop round, you might ask? Your lowest points total for one single event gets dropped. Only your 5 best finishes count. Some drivers, like Jordan Daly, for instance, have already used that drop round. Daly, of course, had that nightmare race 1 week ago that we covered, and they've already used their drop round. They have to be perfect for the next 4 weeks in a row. Other teams, they've had quite poor finishes, and they hope that those few points will be erased in replace of something better in the future. John, if you've used your drop round already, do you have to drive a little bit more careful than you normally would? Or do you have to go for it extra hard knowing that you've got to make up for lost time?
Yeah, it's a tricky one to call. You kind of almost want to play it kind of safe to know that you're going to get a solid points haul, but then obviously playing it safe is kind of no reward, no risk and no reward, as they say. So it's that really tricky balance. You just really have to take every race as it comes and just kind of focus on what you can and can't do in the moment. I mean, like if you're stuck behind a rival for lap after lap after lap, do you really want to risk, dive bombing him and then ending up, taking you both out of the race? Do you just want to play it safe and sit behind him and just get a solid bag of points? It's very hard to call as a driver. You just really have to do it race by race, Jesse.
I think that's a good point. I think there's something to be said about not changing your mentality or your tactics mid-season. Yes, a race might have not gone your way, but that doesn't mean that you can't go out there and attack and continue to try and get as many points as possible. And the same thing, if you have one round where you scored a top 5 and you got a boatload of points and one round where you barely got any, just assume that that's the worst it's going to get. Don't change anything and get after it. I think that's the right attitude. But today, with the rain, with everything on the line, I'm going to tell you there's a lot of these teams that are going to be using their drop round for this race simply because of the conditions.
Yeah, some drivers not very accustomed to driving in the wet. Other drivers, absolutely love it, and they really do shine. So it's going to be interesting to see where the talent lies in this field today. Looking up and down the starting order as we have the ultimate driving machine being shown on screen. Unfortunately, no BMWs here tonight, as this is, of course, reserved for British manufacturers and British tracks only. But back to my point, we do see people such as Tom Shipston, who we've seen be excellent at round 1 and 2, all the way down in P18 in that Bentley. So maybe one of the drivers that's not quite accustomed to these wet conditions, maybe more of a dry driver, enjoys driving in, stable conditions. Whereas we see people like Nicole Fox, not been up there in the qualifying and practice, but never really had a solid race result yet. However, she has managed to qualify herself in P2 in silver, so possibly the wet conditions being more accustomed to her. And the question that we have to ask at the start of every race, Jesse, who is your money on to win today?
Man, usually you ask me a question like that and I usually have an answer. Folks that have been longtime viewers of the channel, they will attest to that, I'm sure. Today, though, I'm not so sure, John, simply because that qualifying, we'll call it spirited. It was hotly debated, contested, and spirited. I don't know. Those Astons, I don't think any of the Astons got a good shot at the end of that to take that away. I think some of them possibly could have done. I don't know, it ended up being dominated by McLaren here, but I just don't know. I will make a strange prediction I think you might like. I don't think our pole sitter wins this race.
Very interesting. Yeah, hopefully not Curse of the Commentator on that one, Jesse, as we line up 2 by 2 coming through the Melbourne hairpin of turn 10 and progressing down to Goddard's of turn 11 right now. You're going to be wanting to try and heat those wet tyres up as much as you can, ready for turn 1. You want to have your brakes nice and hot, so when you stand on them, you do have a nice bite in the brake pads. But very wide start procedure here at Donington. Could literally park a couple of double-decker buses between the two McLarens on the front row. Racing off there, doing a bit of grass cutting around the outside of Goddard's, keeping that lawn nice and trimmed as we come down the Wheatcroft straight towards the gantry, waiting for the green flag to drop. Very long hold here, very late drop on the green flag, and we are green here at Donington. Very equal start here. We don't see many people gaining, don't see many people losing. You want to be keeping it 2 wide into the turn, but we're seeing 3 wide in the background. Nicole Fox there, I believe, getting sandwiched between Matthew Kingston-Lee's giant yellow Aston Martin as we head down the Craner curve side by side in the wet. It's something you do not want to be doing there as the bollards take a massive hit, flying off into the distance. Daniel Austin through the old hairpin, chasing up to the back of Nico Kuizma. We already see a drive-through from Alexander Witzel in P6. His day has gone from bad to worse already, and looking back down towards the back of the grid, we see Tom Shipston off in the background as well, doing a bit of grass cutting. So the caretakers fully out in force here in the GT3 machinery today, Jesse.
Well, the drivers should know you never cut grass when it's wet, but shame on them. That's absolutely horrible for our championship leader in the high silver of Shipston. That's exactly what you shouldn't be doing, going a bit wide like that. Luckily, they were able to get it all sorted out, though they are well down the order now. This will not do them any favors for the championship. Daniel Austin looking down into the hairpin through Melbourne, trying to pick up P2 as Rachinov has taken and driven away with the lead. Kuizma and Austin's here fighting it off. Oh my goodness, Kuizma just about chopped off the nose of Austin, but got it in there. Still not deterred. Daniel Austin's looking down the inside of Goddard's. No way through there. They'll continue. Early pit stops already.
I believe that's Alexander Witzel coming into the pit lane to try and clear that drive-through off before the next round of stops do come through. So Alexander's going to have to take a second trip down pit lane, which obviously you do not want to be doing at this stage of the game. Nicole Fox surviving turn 1 antics. We did see her sandwiched in the middle of 2 other cars either side, one of which being this car ahead, Matthew Kingston Lee. Of course, these guys not fighting for position, but Matthew Kingston Lee does separate Nicole Fox from the 2 leaders of silver of Matthew Campbell and Ethan Scott ahead in the McLaren. So having a bit of a McLaren Cup here today, Jesse. It seems like that is the very strong mark to pick, and the Astons and the Bentleys are nowhere really to be found in this race.
Don't tell your championship leader Austin's that. He doesn't want to hear that, and that's not something he would appreciate hearing or hearing you say. Here is Tom Shipston, the ground zero driver. That was one of the cars that was off early. They dropped a ton of positions, but this fight continuing through the Fogarty S's, and that was a little bit of a slip there. That's going to allow Daniel Austin 3. Kuizma did not get a good run through the Fogarty S's, and down to the inside it's Daniel Austin. And can Kuizma fight it on the outside? No, he can't. Maybe a little bit of a bump through the Melbourne hairpin, trying to go the long way through Goddard's now is Kuizma. Nico not willing to let this go, juking to the left, to the right, and then eventually falls back in line. Daniel Austin has the pass made for the time being after a spirited rebuttal from Kuizma, but Austin's now will set his eyes on Rachinov in front. 3.3 seconds, folks. Remember that. We'll see if that gap starts to come down for the lead. And just one other thing about the car that had the drive-through penalty. I thought that starting order looked a bit strange from the camera, the helicopter camera that we had, and I believe the car penalized was the car that was out of place in all of that. Of course, you have to be within a certain tolerance on the start, otherwise you do get a drive-through penalty, John.
Yeah, it's so easy to do. It's, if you're not paying enough attention, you're thinking too far ahead into turn 1 or something silly like that. It is very easy to overshoot where you kind of should be in the formation order. Of course, no grid spots on the floor to kind of account for where you are. You just have to use the tolerance guidance of the UI in game. So not a particularly good start for Alexander Witzel, but Martin Lawrence here in the old school Bentley, really sticking it to the back of Jan Yao in this little train. I believe Stephen Van Kampen heads up the top of it on this one, coming into the S's. We want to maximize your exit through the S's, as we saw last lap with Nico Kuizma obviously getting caught out there by a little bit of oversteer allowed. Obviously Daniel Austin's up side by side, a little bit of elbows out into the hairpin, and of course you find yourself an extra position ahead of your rival. Looking back to Jordan Daly, we see this kind of train that we saw at Alton Park, Jesse, where we've got one car ahead and kind of everybody's just concertinaing up behind, and it just makes it super tricky. If nobody in the train is making a mistake, it's very hard to get past.
Well, these two as well. These two are teammates on different days. They're not that today. One driving for Connection Lost Racing, Martin Lawrence, we call him Race Car Jesus, and Jordan Daly driving for Race Ventura. So there's no love lost in this battle now, but Daly is predisposed. He's got McLaughlin behind him, who is trying to take that spot away from him and obviously try to catch up to the top 4 in their class. Martin Lawrence is trying to get by Yan Yo, and Jans has no interest in allowing that to happen either. They all got incredibly close through the Melbourne hairpin. No contact, good racing in the very wet conditions. We continue to watch Shipston, our championship leader in high silver, as they continue to try and work their way back through some of the traffic. They've done that just a little bit. And Les Stevenson in the 46 McLaren, I believe they're making their first start of the season, freshly back from vacation and in the British Championship. Very nice to see that. Speaking of, there might be a move being made on him. Right, Becky, the 127, trying to go the long way through the Fogarty S's.
A very brave move if you try on the outside into the S's. It just simply does not work. The inside car is going to win every single time. You're almost better kind of backing out, tucking in behind your rival, getting a good run through the S's behind him, and then firing it up the inside into the Melbourne hairpin. But Les Stevenson here with much superior drive off of the hairpin, probably the engine towards the back of that McLaren helping with a little bit of traction in the wet today, whereas obviously the Bentley's engine is over the front axle. Speaking of cars with engines over the front axle, here we have Nico Kumpu right on the back of Ben Mullard. We saw these guys at Silverstone going at each other in the early stages of the race, and now we see them here again at Donington with Nico Kumpu behind Ben Mullard coming out the Melbourne hairpin. We're right on board with Nico as he comes up the hill from Starkey's Bridge into McLaren's at the top. Looking like the Aston has that better grunt up the hill compared to the McLaren. We did see this time and time again at Silverstone. We saw, you know, a certain few cars kind of losing in certain areas towards like the brakes and then gaining it again on the straights as Nico nearly outbrakes himself into Coppers. Runs a little bit wide. Mullard ahead gets a much cleaner run towards the S's. There's going to be no move to be made here from Nico, but maybe Nico wanted to try and maximize his run through the S's to try and slingshot his way past Mullard into the hairpin. Both cars a little bit squirrely there. Mullard's car, not Mullard's car, Kumpu's car very sideways coming out of the S's. Looks to the inside, but no move to be made as we see this little train behind forming with Matthew Campbell heading it up in the 260 McLaren with this man here, Ethan Scott. We're essentially watching the battle for P1 and 2 in silver into Gollard's. No move to be made. Matthew Kingston-Lee patiently waits behind these guys, probably doesn't want to get too involved with it as it can really hamper yourself if you're trying to chase down a rival, although Matt Campbell with the far superior exit out of Gollard's towards turn 1 of Redgate. Matthew Kingston-Lee, I'm very surprised, didn't even try and make a move there. Ethan Scott very hampered on corner exit, and of course Nicole Fox for P3 in silver is lurking just behind. But back to this battle here, we have Les Stevenson heading up the train. We have George Kwiatkowski in the 202, and a big moment there from Rybecki, really struggling with rear traction on that Bentley. Just seems to be going backwards every time we look at him at corner exit, Jesse.
Yeah, it sure does. Keep in mind, Rybecki was right on the back of this man, Jordan Daly, a lap or so ago. They've fallen back a bunch of spots, and of course Daly has moved forward a couple of spots as well. The 123 has been given a drive-through penalty, and I can only assume, by virtue of me having a penalty report, that that is the case. Will Stevenson on the case, and it is a drive-through for car 123, misjudging the corner, I suspect, and hitting the 9 off of the racetrack. That on lap 1, turn 10. So our first penalty of the day is a drive-through for the 123.
So Melbourne hairpin so easily done if you just misjudge where you need to brake. You dozed off a bit, you're not really paying much attention, and you hit the brake too late, and all of a sudden you've got a wall of 10 cars ahead of you as Mullard goes a bit wide, allows Nico Kumpu up the inside, nearly touching rear quarters there on both cars. But with Mullard taking the better run out of the corner, Nico Kumpu unfortunately cannot capitalize on this as we see the 1-2-3 jump in the pit lane just out of our window to clear their drive-through from that opening lap as we ride on board the splitter cam now of Nico Kumpu coming down the Craner curves. Like we said in qualifying, usually a section that is flat and dry, but unfortunately not in the wet. You do have to lift using all of the entry curb on the old hairpin and all of the exit curb as well. Very easy to run yourself a little bit too wide by trying to be too eager on the power through the old hairpin as we come up the hill towards McLaren's turn 7. Mullard looking like the much better car kind of on corner exit, but Nico looking like the much better car coming into the corner. So we're seeing this trade-off like we saw a couple of weeks ago, as I said, on these guys. Say manufacturers do have their advantages between them, and certainly today it does look like you want to be in a McLaren. But Tom Shipston here in the number 60 Bentley, still stuck behind the 699 of John Aracer. These guys not really trading places. Maybe Shipston playing the long game, knows he's had a good opening round, knows that, you know, he's still got that drop round to take. Maybe he's planning on having this one as his drop round in the season, knowing maybe Donington's not his best circuit, maybe knowing that he's not the best in the wet. Going to play it safe, stick behind John Aracer. We have seen John Aracer being one of those cars that does make late moves in the race. He starts off you know, in this kind of mid-pack area, and then before you know it, you've got John Eraser nearly in the top 10 just by being consistent, smooth, and, you know, driving danger-free. It's really a battle of attrition. Even though it's just an hour, you know, small mistakes soon stack up, Jesse.
Well, it's going to change a lot as well. We take a look at the weather forecast, and I saw this whenever the race started in 30 minutes. It's actually a bit sooner than that now. In the next 15 to 20 minutes, we are going to have we're going to have heavier rain in 10 minutes, but it's actually going to be a bit more so. And there we are. It's heavier rain now, and that is going to persist as Jordan Daly just about slides it through the old hairpin and saves it. Almost a big disaster for the Race Ventura driver, but they somehow slide the Bentley around and save it. That's certainly one of those where you're on the brakes and you're turning it as hard left as you can, and you're probably saying some expletives at the time. And whenever it comes back into line, you probably give it a little bit of praise.
Yeah, I believe, speaking to Daly last week, he had a big moment at Silverstone as well, I believe, in the practice. A little bit of contact there between King McGee and who's that? Alan Knight in the old Fart Club 970 at McLaren. So not having the best of races, but an absolute excellent team name. We're going to catch a replay here as we head up into turn 8 of Coppice. McGee sees a gap on the inside. Alan Knight maybe fighting a little bit of oversteer, a little bit of unsettling. Bump indoors, and Alan Knight, unfortunately, the one who suffers with the trip to the gravel and the marshal waving the flag on the post. Coming to the front, we see these guys, Nico Kuizma and Daniel Austins, still separated by a very small margin indeed. So this fight is probably going to be raging on for quite a while. There's a big moment there from Nico Kuizma as he cops a load of curb down the crane of curves. Very unsettling in the McLaren, something you don't want to be doing in the wet. And I believe, similar to what Jordan Daly did into the old hairpin, I believe he touched the wheel on the outside curb as he turned in on the brakes, and that was just enough to unsettle that big old barge and send him sideways through the old hairpin. So Pirellis are going to be screaming from all the heat and all the drifting that's just happened. And speaking of Bentleys, here we see King McGee making very big moves indeed, already onto the back of George Kwiatkowski. Hopefully not a race replay from last lap that we're about to see here. Same place going into McLaren's, looking like the better car of the two. A bump in the back for Kwiatkowski. Definitely was contact there. And that's Rybecki through indeed in the other Bentley. So absolute chaos here. I'm going to say stewards are going to be watching the number 9 Bentley quite closely after those 2 laps, Jesse.
Well, things have certainly kicked off here. It was sort of a workman's-like first 10 minutes, but now a lot of the racing underway in the heavier rain, and it's definitely not expected to get any better, and the contact there from a couple of times. By the way, folks, we have a little bit of a debate going on in the booth for Lee King, and well, I say it's got to be Mage or Mage, simply because if it was McGee, that G would have to be capitalized because that's how English works. But they have a British flag, and I'm being told by several British folks who seem to be an expert on English. I don't know how that worked out, but beyond that, they seem to think it's McGee. But for me, the G isn't capitalized, it's Mage. Lee, help us out and just tell us. Either way, it is the best first name in sim racing, and that is that. Tom Shipston continuing to work their way up. Mind you, they were P20 at one point. They worked their way into 17th place. They're right behind Grim Lilith for 15th place. Do keep in mind, these are for position. When they pass Les Stevenson, that was more points. They can get by Grim Lilith, it'll be more points too, and it will be it'll be a nightmare situation avoided for Shipston.
Yeah, certainly Shipston definitely on the comeback drive of his life. Does want to get past Grim Lilith as fast as he can. As you look up the board, the cars ahead are all pro until you hit Nicole Fox in P10. So if Shipston does get past, he's going to have to make up 5 to 6 positions before he even gets remotely near. As we see, Nico Kumpu here has slipped back from the rear of Ben Mullard's McLaren and has come into the clutches of Ethan Scott. So not sure what happened there. Possibly a little mistake from our Finnish driver that's a regular here at RCI as he comes into turn 1 looking defensive on Ethan Scott. Can definitely see a dry line forming around the circuit, Jesse. So although the heavier rain is coming, maybe these cars are circulating fast enough to keep that dry line, well, semi-dry compared to the rest of it. So it's going to make passing offline super tricky. As we see here, none of the drivers touching that outside curb on entry like Jordan Daly did. And Nico Kumpu proceeds to try and drive away from Ethan Scott. Of course, these two are not for championship points. They are purely for honours. But Ethan Scott obviously wants to keep as many cars between himself and these two, Matt Campbell and Nicole Fox, as he can for silver honours. Kingston Lee is the spanner in the works in the 555 just ahead there, the bright yellow New York taxi looking car. Unfortunately, no taxis here today. As we head down towards the S's, the fight continues to rage on between the silver top three.
Yeah, you mentioned the racetrack condition, and I think what's happening here is, yes, it is raining significantly harder than it was at the start, and I think Nicole Fox had an issue with getting through the Fogarty S's, and that's allowed Van Kampen to get beside them. Fox won't care too much about that, other than the fact that it allowed Campbell to get one car in between the two of them. But other than that, that position loss doesn't actually do much. But yeah, what I think is going on here, because we have so many race cars, the rain coming down harder is almost inconsequential, really. The track has, if it has deteriorated, it's deteriorated only a small bit. We have seen the bulk of the slides, barring the one Gymkhana-style drift by Jordan Daly. Most of the handling issues I've noticed are the McLaren cars. They look very shaky going through the center apex and off of corners. Not so much getting into them, but they look unstable. Look out for that. That could become worse as it gets more wet. Let's talk about, speaking of Kwiatkowski having a big issue into Redgate there, getting it back on the track without further incident. Like I was going to talk about the high silver class. Remember, Fox, I believe, was up near the top, if not on pole for that class. And then Matt Campbell was leading. Something must have happened to the 260 of Campbell, because Ethan Scott in the 34 has assumed the lead of the high silver class. Good battle going on there, even though they've, as far as I can tell, they've not actually been battling each other. Looks like the high silver class battling the racetrack.
Yeah, certainly so. You just got to keep it on the straight and narrow at this point. Any small mistake, as we saw last time by from Nicole Fox, allowed Stephen Van Kampen through. Just a poor run through the S's opens up the door entirely into the Melbourne hairpin. But like you say, Jesse, it is just a bit of a race of attrition at the moment. Who can keep their car the straightest, who can stop sliding the most. But the McLarens do seem to be over-rotating that little bit on mid-corner. However, the Bentleys do appear to be very much struggling putting the power down on the exit of the corners. But speaking of Bentleys, I did notice Tom Shipston took a very early stop down pit road earlier on to clear his mandatory stop off the board. So going to be having to watch him now. Tom Shipston obviously running in a little bit of cleaner air maybe than what he was stuck behind Grim Lillis McLaren. But here we see Stephen Van Kampen and Nicole Fox have swapped places again. Nicole Fox seems to have got ahead of the Aston Martin. Two very similarly coloured cars, so if you do squint, it is quite easy to mix the two up. Heading up the hill here into McLean's, we're looking from Nicole Fox ahead at Matthew Campbell. This is of course for the silver lead. Nicole Fox looking very good on corner entry, but possibly understeering a little bit in the mid corner, and looking at the TV camera in the middle, just hidden by the driver's safety net. You can see the glow of lights from the Aston Martin Vantage behind of Stephen Van Kampen. He's going to be keen to try and get past these two to get a move on and try and catch the back of Matthew Kingston Lee for some more championship points. Coming through the S's down into second gear in these conditions. Normally, from memory, this corner is at least a third, and you've got to be very, very committed over the curbs. Obviously, the curbs in the wet, not the best material to be driving on. They are that little bit slippy, as we saw Jordan Daly get stung by them earlier on, as Stephen Van Kampen dropping away slightly from the back of Nicole Fox and into the clutches of Jan Yao in the 48 Aston behind. And behind him, he's got two very angry Bentleys chasing him down of Martin Lawrence and Jordan Daly. Two very different cars here, very similar grills on these, very similar styling in certain areas, but of course one much newer than the other, so should be the favourable pick as we see a big wiggle from Jordan Daly coming out of turn 1 of Redgate, heading down into the crane of curves towards the old hairpin, not wanting to do what he did only a couple of laps ago on the entry curb, taking plenty of apex there as Jan Yao comes under fire here from Martin Lawrence's older Bentley, as you literally could not separate those two guys just then as we flicked to the helicam. Martin Lawrence trying to focus on a better run through McLean's to try and get himself up alongside into Coppice, but no luck there as we see Jordan Daly behind using all of the track and some more. Certainly somewhere where you don't want to be is out on that wet grass. Absolutely zero traction out there. Martin Lawrence does look like the faster car out of this duo as we jump on board the splitter cam from Martin Lawrence, looking underneath the rear wing of Jan Yao. Yao's car looking maybe slightly more stable through the S's there, allows a little bit of a gap to open up into the Melbourne hairpin, so Martin Lawrence not going to be near enough here to make a move. Jan Yao taking a very tight line there on the first half and a little wider line on the second half, but just see the speed of that Aston off the corner, Jesse. Absolutely gapped Martin Lawrence from 10 to 11.
Yeah, I think some of that has to do with the brand parity, if I'm completely honest, but some of that was also just getting off the corner better as well. Well, this race is one of those where you have to keep it on the road for more than one reason. We saw Daly go completely off the racetrack. I'm also quite certain that you can get a track limits warning for doing that, as antiquated as that might seem to all of you at home. I believe that is a place where you can do that. You can run wide, lose time, and nearly crash yourself and get a track limits warning for doing so in between McLean's and Coppice. So you got to watch out for that, certainly and always. Lee King has got themselves drive-through penalty, and I am forced to believe that that is steward's decision, and it is. Drive-through for car number 9, misjudging the corner, hitting the 202 and turning them around. So that is a drive-through for car 9. That was back on lap 9, turn 7. And all the other incidents are racing incident, no further actions. 123 in the 35, the 12 in the 413, the 7 in the 46, and a no further action between the 970 and the 9. So just the 2 penalties thus far. The racetrack sloppy, but the driving, for the most part, certainly hasn't been.
Has been, touch wood. I don't want to do curse to the commentators here. We're going to wait for them to go around the Melbourne hairpin before I open my mouth. But it has been a fairly clean race so far, Jesse. We've seen a little bit of argy-bargy, a little bit of elbows out racing from a few of these guys, but is expected with these wet conditions. Everybody trying to adapt to the changing conditions. But looking down the board, I have noticed that Grim Lilith has also taken their mandatory pit stop out, and looking to the right there we see Jordan Daly's Bentley heading down pit road as well, so maybe time for those guys to clear their stops off. So we essentially have Grim Lilith and Tom Shipston, two guys that were together on the track a couple of laps ago, now kind of in the same window, having both taken their mandatory stop. So going to be good to watch those guys to see how much ground they can make up through the silver class. Tom Shipston not having the best race he has ever had in this season. As we flick back to Stephen Van Kampen, still trying to get past Nicole Fox up into Coppice. Looks like quite an understeery Aston there. Maybe Stephen Van Kampen has overdriven his car. He has certainly lost a lot of ground to Nicole Fox ahead. And of course that opens himself up to Jan Yao's 48 Aston in the rear as they jump through the S's using plenty of curb, even though it's something that I personally would not want to be doing. Down into the Melbourne hairpin, no moves to be had here this time, although Stephen Van Kampen does look like the more confident car through the Melbourne hairpin as they head down towards Gollard's, the final turn here at Donington Park. A corner you want to get absolutely right to maximise your run down the start finish straight, and of course a corner that you want to be taking a little bit differently if you want to come into the pits, such as Stephen Van Kampen. Very early pit limiter here at Donington Park. It's almost as the wall pinches, you have your 50 board slapped right on your left hand side, so very easy to get caught out if you've not practiced your stop here before. So something you want to be doing in practice is my advice. But Martin Lawrence up into P12 overall at the moment. and I believe P9 possibly in Pro, if my maths is correct. So great showing from the old school Bentley. It's such a shame that not more old school cars have signed up for this league. However, if you do want to sign up, sign-ups are still open for mid-season entries. If you do fancy a stab at the British Masters, head on over to racerci.com, where you can find all of our events in a handy calendar format. This man here, Alexander Witzel in the 199, yet to clear his mandatory stop. Of course, picked up a drive-through at the start for an unfortunate misplacement of his car on the rolling grid, although his next target in his sights is McLaughlin in the car number 7 as they get super close through Coppice, turn 8, heading down into Starkey Straight, where there used to be half of a Dunlop tyre covering the track just on the rise here. Unfortunately is no more. An iconic section of Donington Park gone forever. Tipping through the S's, say two very different lines there. We see McLaughlin with not a lot of curb on the second half, and we see Witzel with a lot of curb on the second half. So two very different lines, and obviously coming out two very different ways, with McLaughlin getting that slightly better run down into the Melbourne hairpin. Witzel looking that little bit better on the brakes, but kind of drives himself a little bit too deep. Can't quite get the McLaren alongside McLaughlin's McLaren as they come through the last turn. Neither of them wanting to pit. This could be a place where you kind of think, maybe I should be pitting, and get yourself out of this kind of nasty train that you end up in, just maybe losing time sat behind your rival. And looking down the board, Jesse, I've just spotted Rai Becky in the 127 with a stop-go 30.
Well, you talked about it already. You talked about the pit lane being incredibly compact, and the line, for some people that don't come here a lot, it is quite strange because you don't expect it to be exactly where it is, and it's also really easy to not be in first gear. The pit limiter for most cars only works in first gear, so if you upshift to second, or maybe you don't get down through the box quick enough, you could be over that limit. That drivers, what they'll normally do is they'll be in first gear and they'll have their foot pegged to the floorboard just to make sure they maintain pit speed. Maybe something like that happened, but more likely than anything, in the wet race, the pit lane does not have the dry line that the racetrack has. Probably slid through the line, and there is a leeway there, I'm pretty sure, if you get down to it quickly enough. It used to be you could positively speed into the pit lane. These days, though, pretty confident you have to be there at the line, though in recent weeks I have seen evidence that that's not entirely the case. I definitely saw a friend of ours here at RCI TV speed in the pit lane and get away with it because they were only a few Ks over the limit. John, I gotta ask you this question because I've been thinking about this. Are you surprised that only now are we are seeing people pit? Certainly I would have expected several cars to come in very early, but they haven't.
Yeah, it's a strange one on wet tyres in ACC. They can go for extremely long periods, feeling kind of quite good in the way they drive. Obviously, tyres designed to last up to an hour and sometimes even longer. So if it was me, I probably would have fueled my car a little bit heavier towards the start and probably pitted towards the end of the pit window. I mean, especially if I was on the front row of the grid like Rachinov or, Austin or Koizma, to give yourself that kind of longer run maybe over your rival. You might start slipping at the start, but again, you've got that kind of, you've got a lot of defense to put up at Donington. It's very easy to cover the common positions, and if you maximize your drive off the corners, normally you're fairly all right here, Jesse.
Well, I've just read chat. Jordan Daly, who was having an interesting day to say the least, had a couple of sideways excursions in the old hairpin, one of which we caught on camera, one of which we didn't. Well, it's gone from that to pretty poorly for Jordan Daly. Their tire strategy has switched them to dry tires. Of course, you don't want to be on a dry tire in this condition, and that has led to an additional stop for Jordan Daly. No pun intended, but somehow still pun intended. When it rains, it pours.
Yeah, sometimes you just have one of those really stinkers of a race, and it is just, one of those things, like we said on the grid, Jesse, you just have to really forget and, take it in your stride and think, right, this is my drop round, job done. can't do any more, so let's just, focus on the rest of the season. As we see Les Stevenson to the right of the picture there, diving into the pit lane for his mandatory stop. As we see another McLaren, I believe, leaving the pit lanes just behind, possibly the 1, 2, 3 down in P24 there, as the battle was raging on between those two McLarens. As we flick back to Nico Kumpu, still in a very stale state behind Ben Mullard's McLaren. Can't quite find, that extra bit of pace he needs to get up alongside and tuck into the wing of Mullard. So maybe it's time for Nico to call it a day on the stint, jump in, grab some fresher wets, and jump back out and have another stab at it for 29 minutes. He does look much more confident on the brakes, does Nico, compared to Mullard, but Mullard's McLaren looks a lot more planted on corner exit than the front engine Aston. Probably with the engine in the back of that McLaren, it's going to help it a lot in these conditions, as neither driver is pitting. As Nico Kumpu dives into the pits very late there, almost jinking Mullard to go on another lap before pulling in himself. As we see Alan Knight here.
I think you called that strategy.
Yeah,
you just called that.
I think I am at one with Nico Kumpu. I've seen him race so much in Mondays and Fridays that I am mind, body and soul of Nico.
That was absolutely impressive. Are you taking bids for crew chief jobs? Because I'd love you to be my strategist. That was brilliant. I agree with that, by the way. By the way, I heard something interesting, John. You're going to love this anecdote. I have heard that people wish that we disagreed more. Apparently, you and I agree a lot. And people wish that there was more friction in the box. I will say, I don't like that you are named after an Oreo. I don't like that because it makes me hungry. There, you got your friction in the box. Alan Knight is trying to get by Kwiatkowski, that for P15. Both these cars, of course, in the same class, but yet they still have to do one more pit stop. Kumpu is clear, by the way. That was... what'd you call it? A jink into the pit lane? A juke, perhaps? But it was clean. No pit road penalty for the 256.
Yeah, as we said, super easy to pick up penalties, so something very good there from Nico to not pick one up on the late dive into the pit lane. Like you say, Jesse, could have been in second gear by the time he starts mashing his pit limiter button to try and slow the car down. But reading chat, our very own Sebastian Brunier has commented on strategy, saying about how in wet conditions it is a lot better to run longer because you do get a better outlight for the race. Obviously, if in half an hour it's getting a little bit heavier in rain, do you want to risk, hitting? Could after the half an hour it suddenly stop and completely dry up? Obviously, not a lot of wind here at Donington today, so weather is probably set in for the final 26 minutes. But this man here, Martin Lawrence, has been a big impressing for me today. In the old school Bentley, has managed to fight his way up pre-pit stop into P7. So absolutely great pace from Martin Lawrence in the Connection Lost 171. Not an easy car to drive from experience. A lot of things very dated on it, not a lot of actual kind of grip in it. It's very, very tricky even in dry, so God knows how he's faring this in the wet, but proof why Martin Lawrence is, in the pro class as he comes through Coppers here. So steering wheel near enough dead straight on exit, trying to not fight much oversteer. Giant rearview mirror in the Bentley. We appear to have lost the Lev Stevenson car that was behind on TV cams. Not sure if that's just a bug. Nope, there he is, fading in. Camouflages himself in with the grass nicely as we head down towards the Melbourne hairpin, turn 10. Fourth gear down to third, second and first for Martin Lawrence, just to see how the revs build. He short shifts into second mid-apex to try and minimise the wheel spin on corner exit, but looking out of the window, Jesse, below us, we see Daniel Austin's and Rachanov in the pits to take their mandatory stops.
Yeah, we sure do. Austin's is in with Rachanov, and Austin's was not making up time on the leading 24 McLaren car. It's 6.7 seconds as they sit in the pit lane. It's not a total loss, but Rachanov has just been perfect thus far. No chance given to Austin's as Martin Lawrence has come in. You were talking about Martin Lawrence driving the old Bentley. Yeah, that car has its quirks, certainly, and it is very difficult to drive. Lawrence was in our chat pre-race telling us to basically pray for him or something along that line. I thought that was quite humorous considering how well the race has gone for him. Of course, the biggest issue with that Bentley is that the steering wheel's on the wrong side.
I think you mean the steering wheel is on the right side, Jesse. So there you go, another disagreement for tonight. So we're getting some friction in the booth tonight.
We're giving you what you asked for. Friction.
I believe Martin Lawrence's exact words were, "Help me, please," followed by a laughing, crying emoji. So unless you've been praying to your chosen God, Jesse, it seems to have been working quite well for Lawrence today. As we see Tom Shipston here in the Bentley trying to find a way past Grim Lilith's McLaren, but to no avail. The McLaren looking super good on corner exit, as we've got to watch here on pit exit. Of course, drivers using the lane normally to maximize their run through turn one to get that wider line and get it turned in a lot quicker, but John Aracer coming out of the pits, I believe that was, in the other McLaren behind Tom Shipston at the moment. It was indeed the 699, nearly throwing a spanner in the works for Tom Shipston. He kind of sized up the move onto the lane, and then all of a sudden there was a McLaren emerging. So not a good one. As we look here to Alan Knight, unfortunately with a stop-go 30. I believe he has currently disconnected from the server, so having a particularly good race is Alan Knight, probably one to think for his drop round in this season. As flicking back here to Tom Shipston and Grim Lilith. This is going to be a fight raging on to the end, I feel, and another Bentley there, I believe that's Rybecki possibly getting out of the way of these guys, not wanting anything to do with the fight for silver, what is essentially P5, I believe here, Jesse, between these two. So all to play for at the moment. A few silver cars ahead still to make a stop. Sutcliffe being one in the 64, so possibly still a couple of positions to gain for these guys. And Nicole Fox comes out here right onto the racing line with Ethan Scott side by side through turn one. I believe they touched, Jesse.
They absolutely did touch through Redgate that time. They'll go down the hill. Of course, the tire's not up to temperature on Fox's car. Fox had the advantage for just a second, but Matt Campbell, with the temperature in the tires and a lap already on them, they're going to take that spot back away. The Flying Hellfish 260 doing exactly what they wanted to do, and that was stay in front of Fox for what will be P2. All of the competing silver cars here have already taken their stop, with the exception, of course, of Sutcliffe in the 64, who is now in the lane. That was incredible. A little bit of argy-bargy, maybe. I think Fox was trying to pin Campbell to the inside of the corner, and that might have not been the wisest of choices. I think that invited just a little bit of contact. Wetzel in the 199 is in the lane, meaning that the only cars at the front that have yet to take their stop is Mullard in the 77, and the best name in sim racing, Matthew Kingston Lee, in the 555. Meanwhile, this battle rages on. These are the kind of battles as a racing driver, John, you live for, isn't it? You're locked in a battle. It might not be for spot number one, but it doesn't matter. It wouldn't matter if it was for 25th. It is a battle. You want to beat them. Fox is not going to let this go. Matt Campbell's not going to let them by.
Yeah, battles are something we kind of all race for in sim racing. You know, we don't enter these, you know, leagues to essentially sit in no man's land and, you know, hot lap for what is essentially an hour. So it's great to see, obviously, these guys in their mixed skill bracket of high silver being locked together still after nearly 40 minutes of racing and a pit stop each as well. And it's weird how the tides turn here at Donington Park, as the dry line is definitely still very prevalent as the rain has eased up a little bit. However, those you eagle-eyed viewers looking to the top right, you do see the rain getting heavier in half an hour. However, this will not affect us, obviously, with only 20 minutes of running. So speaking of battles, we do have a little bit of a joke between myself and friends that anywhere I race, I always end up in a John Dalton zone. So that's when you're too fast for the guy behind you, but you're too slow to catch the guy ahead of you. So you just kind of sit in this kind of awkward no man's land, kind of hot lapping, like I've just said. So not something I enjoy doing. So I do live for the battles, especially when we get a very close one in endurance racing. Say completely different kind of format to sprint racing, as Tom Shipston here looks to the inside on the exit of Coppice, coming down towards the S, as we've seen the outside line not working all too well, although Shipston's Bentley doesn't look like it's ahead by a margin, and it was Grim Lilith there choosing the sensible option to tuck in behind Shipston and try and maybe maximize their run down into the Melbourne hairpin. However, it doesn't look like it's going to be happening as Nicole Fox and Matt Campbell now go at it as well into turn 1. Nicole Fox with the overlap on the outside line, breaks a lot later than Campbell, tries to drive around the outside of Redgate. They nearly touch again coming down into the Craner curves, and Nicole Fox does it round the outside in the wet. Turn 1 of Donington. What a move, Jesse.
Matt Campbell is going to be saying, look, there was contact. You got to give Nicole Fox a penalty for that. I don't think they're going to get any. I think that was hard racing. And you know what? Fox couldn't get that done on the outlap because the tires weren't up to temperature, but Nicole must have known that that was possible to get that move done, tries it again, and just about pulls it off. That was a gutsy call to go offline, maximize Redgate, and get that pass done. A lesser driver might have not even attempted that. Now the question remains, 19 minutes left in the race, 5 seconds in front is Ethan Scott. Can Nicole Fox from Next Round Racing catch Ethan Scott? Can Fox win this race?
So I'd love to see it. Nicole Fox, not had the best start to her season. However, is really proving it why they are in the high silver region, as Grim Lilith now comes under fire from a pro car. So nothing to be gained here from either driver, just a simple swap of positions, but it is going to lose Grim Lilith some time as they kind of nearly touch through the S's there, going down into the Melbourne hairpin, as we see Alexander Wheatzel with a slight overlap. Grim's gonna just let it go. Grim, you don't need to fight this, just let it go. Tom Shipston slipping away.
I don't think Grim's going to let that happen. Well, actually, I take that back. No, I was right the first time. Never mind. Crossover move. Near contact right there in Goddard's. They just about get away with it. Alexander Wetzel's trying to figure out what's going on. Thought that maybe Grim let them go, but at the last possible second, stuck their nose down the inside. Space was afforded, but no contact, and that was as close as it gets without an incident. Grim is going to have to be forced to sort of let that go for the time being and just hope that Alexander gets up there and gets to Shipston. By the way, let's talk about Shipston for a moment. Came in your championship leader. I don't think they'll leave championship leader. Oh, Ben Mullard's in. That's the leader of the race coming in. That will hand over the lead to Matthew Kingston Lee, the best name in sim racing, yet they still have to pit. The KL Racing 555, the only car so far that has yet to pit. King McGee in the 9 has also come in, but that car has slipped so far back. I wonder if that car is sitting in the pit lane rather than serving a pit stop. Either way, Rachanov does get through back up to P2. Oh, there's a car off there. Very careful. And I don't know what car that was. I can't see the number of it. Doesn't matter.
That's Sutcliffe, possibly, Jesse.
Yes. Well, Rachanov does get through without further incident, clears the zone. And yes, you were right, Sutcliffe. Some cars having a bit of a struggle today in the weather, and we talked earlier about the brands. It might be down to the manufacturer. It certainly hasn't seemed like that. Nearly every manufacturer having issues today.
Yeah, certainly so. This man having no issues at all. Nico Kumpu seems to have had a very smooth sailing race, but has been looking at the back of Ben Mullard's 77 McLaren for quite a while now. Obviously, Ben Mullard did pit last lap by, so possibly those Pirellis aren't quite up to the optimum temperature that maybe Nico Kumpu's are. So Nico wanting to try and maximize what he can do on these next few laps before obviously the tyres from Mullard's McLaren do come up to temperature. But it does look like Mullard is just in a far superior car at the moment. Nico Kumpu does close up on the brakes and kind of corner entry, but then from the midpoint to exit, Mullard does pull away. So we've got this game of cat and mouse, neither driver making too much of a mistake. Nico has proven time and time again in the RCI events that he is a very, very consistent driver, Jesse, and always scoring high in at least the top 5, if not top 10 at worst.
Well, yeah, this is the other side of the coin. We've seen a lot of drivers. Mr. Mawson has highlighted several drivers having issues today, but when it comes to drivers like Kumpu and Mullard, they just really haven't had issues, and that does make it frustrating. If you're trying to make a pass, you're just looking for anything. Just show me a weakness. But if you're one of those drivers that we're talking about that just refuse to lose, and they're not going to make mistakes, then you have to kind of make your own make your own way through there, whatever that means to you. As Alexander Wetzel, who has passed Grimm, you'll remember, has caught Shipston, and this is what Grimm wants. Grimm wants Wetzel to get in and by Shipston, maybe hold them up just a little bit, catch them at an inopportunistic time, and get back at them. Shipston has just had a fantastic second half of this race. They had that big issue on the opening lap, was off the racetrack, and has driven back through the majority of the silver field. And if they do go on to win this championship, though they might lose the championship lead today, if they go on to win this championship, this might be the catalyst for that.
Yeah, Shipston with a great opening round 1 and 2, but unfortunately not such a strong qualifying here at Donington in the wet. And we did see, like you say, Jesse, Shipston slipping back on the opening lap through the grass in some places. So certainly not what you're doing as championship leader, but maybe just discount this one as a drop round. Count your graces while you can and see what you can salvage from today's drive. Wheatsall looking very racy up behind Shipston's Bentley, and well, if I was Shipston, I'd be moving out of the way and just letting Alexander get on with it. He's going to be fired up from that penalty at the start and wanting again to claw back as much as he can. As Jan Yao here in the 48 on the back of Matt Campbell. Of course, these guys not fighting for any kind of points. Jan is in the pro class and Campbell is in the silver class, so even if they do switch places, nothing will come of it. However, it will be a car between Campbell and a Fox, and obviously this allows Fox to kind of drive away from Campbell, which he has done so since making the move, which is great to see. And say just a comment from Ryan Mawson has just been written over to me. Jan and Matt are friends in real life, so these guys are probably going to go at it. Neither will give each other an inch, kind of like the Vantel brothers we saw a couple of weeks ago at the N24. And I think Matt Campbell may be thinking the better of that one and thinking, you know, Jan, on you go. I'm not having any implications on my championship today. So no real rivalry strikes up here. Maybe if they were in the same class, this could have played out very, very differently. But this does, of course, put Campbell between himself and Stephen Van Kampen, who is chasing down the 48. Big wiggle there from Jan going into the S's. It's going to really compromise his run down into the Melbourne hairpin. Hopefully, Matt Campbell's going to be acting maybe as a gunner on Van Kampen, not overly defending, but not making it easy as Van Kampen goes down the inside. Campbell giving him the inside line into the Melbourne hairpin, but trying a little switchback on the exit, making Van Kampen think twice that maybe Campbell is a bit of a threat here, coming down into Gollards. Campbell looks to the inside. Van Kampen breaks on his marker perfectly, but Campbell's still buried in the rear diffuser of that Aston.
Well, Wetzel's had a race to forget. They will not be singing the high praises of the weather or the racetrack because they have got themselves a drive-through penalty. Nothing's showing up on the penalty report, so that can only be for track limits. The supersonic 199 McLaren will come in and serve that drive-through for track limits, and that will be a day completely ruined. And in fact, they have decided that they are no longer going to take part in the session. And that unfortunate exit for the 199 for the drive-through. Nico Kumpu continuing to follow Mullard, wondering what Nico's probably wondering what they have to do to get by the car in front of them, as they have lost just a little bit of pace to them. Now, that's not it's not good if you've been trying to pass them. Gets up on them in the corner, though. If that's anything to go by. What do you think there, John? Maybe if they can keep this late in the race, do you final lap maybe? Give them a go down the inside, a little bit of a send?
Yeah, we're seeing Nico be very, very strong on corner entry compared to Mullard, but then Mullard, once he hits the apex, he just drives off the corner compared to Nico. Not sure if Aston is maybe fighting a little bit of rear traction issues today in the wet, but Melbourne hairpin every time. Nico is super strong on the brakes, but like you say, Jesse, you've got to be within an earshot of you know, even trying to send it. You can't be sending it from this far back. And speaking of sending it, here we have John Racer going very defensive on Laurie McLaughlin in the number 7 McLaren. Again, these guys not fighting for overall championship points, just purely fighting for honours in the race. As John Racer comes over to cover the racing line from Laurie McLaughlin. Laurie may be thinking twice about it, maybe thinking if he can get past John Racer, he could possibly get onto the back of Grim Lilith and maybe even get past the 115 of Grim and gain themselves some more championship points. But of course, if John Eraser is holding him up, he's not going to be able to do that. He's going to want to try and get past this 699 as fast as he can, but obviously Eraser isn't going to give up easy.
No, and John Eraser's not going to let you go, especially if you're in a different class at this point and it's late in the race as well. You're going to have to fight for that spot, and some of you at home are wondering, what for? You don't get points for it, right? There's no overall championship. Why would you fight it? Well, I mean, it's a point of pride, number one, and number two, it's late in the race. Your give and take is all done. It's no give, and it's all take at this point. Final 9 minutes of the race, and look at this. Laurie McLaughlin's not going to even give him an option at the top of Coppice and just going to take that spot away. Looking down the inside again was Eraser, but it did not matter. The power of Laurie McLaughlin's gray space racing McLaren a little bit too much to take, as that position will change hands. Incredible stuff.
So I think possibly John Eraser maybe thought better of that and thought maybe he'll just give Laurie the chance to go after Grim Lilith. In the background, we do see the bright yellow Aston Martin of Matthew Kingston Lee. 7 minutes still on the pit window, however, still yet to make a pit stop. So maybe when he catches the back of John Eraser's McLaren, he's going to think about diving into the lane. So maybe give it a couple more laps before we see Matthew Kingston Lee coming down pit road. As we see Nico Kumpu here again on corner entry into Coppice, closing right onto the back of Ben Mullard. But then Ben Mullard on the exit of Coppice drives away, but could he be close enough to set himself up through the S's for a good run down into the Melbourne hairpin? Both drivers looking equally as fast through the S's, not one of them making a mistake here, and that's really where you want to make a mistake on your opponent to get past them. But Nico just cannot force the issue on Ben Mullard. Ben keeping a super cool head in the 77 McLaren, proving why he is at the front of this field, battling with the greats like Nico Kumpu. As a slower car ahead there. Sutcliffe's 64 McLaren, I believe, is just ahead on the start-finish straight, crossing the line ahead. So that could play a factor. Maybe if Sutcliffe gets in the way, this could be what Nico Kumpu needs. As we see in the background there, Matthew Kingston Lee leaving pit road, comes out in P5, I believe. Possibly even further down, actually, beg your pardon. Possibly about P7, I believe. Yeah, P7 Matthew Kingston Lee cycles down to when the timing board eventually updates. Ethan Scott behind, obviously no further impact for him. So Matthew Kingston Lee with a very good showing here, if he can hold it to the end for the final 7 minutes. Touch wood. I believe, Jesse, everybody has cycled through their pit stops now.
Yeah, pretty much everybody done with pitting, and it was pretty much from the midway point in the race till the end point here. Matthew Kingston Lee, the last of the late pitters in this case, gets that done and still has a very nice top 10 working here. A couple of cars that I've been paying attention to with excellent rebound races. Well, Rachanov will start at the top. Has the Speed Juice fastest lap of the race award on top of everything. Has done a great job all day. And the Madness McLaren looks like they're destined to win this race. And what a turnabout for them in the championship. They had a race to forget in race number 1. Race number 2 is a lot better. And if they are able to win this race today and keep quickest lap, I think they've just about done everything they need to do to put their name back into the championship hunt here at Donington Park. Keep in mind, this is the mid-season finale. We'll have 3 more races after this, of course, but half the races are in the rearview mirror at the checkered flag tonight. Talk about Matt Campbell, who's been fighting with a couple of different cars, namely Shipston, for the lead of the Silver Championship. This is going to do nothing today but keep that very close. Scott winning this race. Fox, who has just been frustrated with the finishes thus far. They're 12th in the championship. This is a fantastic finish for them. If they can get it to the checkered flag as well, it's going to completely reshuffle the silver class, is what I'm getting at here today. And a special shout out to Grim Lilith, who I talked to prior to the race today. I was talking to Grim. I was like, well, you finished 9th and 10th. It's not been too great. And they attributed that to being in the top split. Of course, Grim, who drives exclusively on controller, no racing wheel setup for Grim Lilith, they usually are in the middle split, and they're in the top split. That's how well they did their pre-Q, and they found it a bit tough. But today, it's been anything but. That car inside the top 5 for most of the day.
Yeah, Grim with an excellent showing of why you don't always need the most expensive gear to be competitive. Anybody with enough practice can certainly get themselves up into top splits. And obviously pre-qualifying is something we do here for all RCI events to try and keep the playing field a bit more level between everybody, to stop people signing up in splits that they maybe shouldn't be in categories that they maybe shouldn't be in. And of course we do actively monitor the championships to see how people are progressing. And you know, if you've somehow pre-qualified in silver split 2 but you're on the pace of split 1, we're going to be moving you up. But one fight that we feel like we haven't covered much today is these two, Jesse. Nico Quizma and Daniel Austins. Both have been very close together all race, but not heard much from them until this point, it seems, with 4 minutes to go.
Well, it's certainly hot enough, and oh boy, a little bit of a scary moment from Nico Quizma, who is absolutely trying to run down Austins. It was over a second. It was nearly 2 seconds at one point. Well, we haven't really been talking about it. There hasn't been much of a battle, but every single lap, Quizma has caught Austins, and now we are shaping up for a last lap battle between the two of them. I was going to say pass, but that's a bit presumptuous of me to assume there's going to be a pass. We'll have to see how wide Austin's Aston Martin can get. I suspect it's going to get very wide. You're not going to let somebody go at this stage.
Yeah, you're certainly going to be clawing onto every space you can get, especially when it comes down to that bottom step of the podium. You're not going to be wanting to give up your slightly higher step to the rival behind you that you know you've outpaced all race. So Daniel Austins is going to be trying to keep super focused ahead on the road at the moment, trying to ignore that McLaren in his rearview mirror of Nico Quizma and try and to see if he can do what he did at Alton Park, which was just drive away from the opposition. Obviously conditions very tricky here with 2 minutes 47 to go. We see Nico Quizma there just out of shot before we cammed away, using all of the extra road and grass and some more coming out of the old hairpin. So Nico is definitely pushing very hard on these wet tyres at the moment. And speaking of fights, I called it earlier, it has been McLaughlin onto the back of Grim Lilith now for what is essentially silver P5, I believe, looking at the board. So silver P5, Laurie McLaughlin is going to want to be taking every point away that they can.
Oh,
Nico
no!
here has lost the back of Ben Millard by the looks of it and picked up a drive-through for his efforts somewhere along the line, Jesse. Not sure what that was for, possibly track limits maybe?
Oh, 100% track limits. I think the two things were absolutely related. I think Nico Kumpu had been going for it in the 256, and I think they pushed a little bit too hard, and they probably went wide. I mentioned earlier that in this particular racetrack, it has this characteristic where you can go wide and also get a track limits warning, and I'm pretty sure Nico Kumpu has done exactly that. That is going to completely destroy their race. They have 3 laps to serve that. There's not 3 laps left in the race. That if they don't serve it, that will be converted into a hefty time penalty at the end of the race, but they have elected to serve that just in time before the end of the race. This battle's still going on between Laurie McLaughlin as well, trying to get by Lilith in front of them. This for P5 in the high silver class. Ethan Scott enjoys an 8-second lead on Fox, who has gapped Yo by 1 second. And this is the nearest battle that we have thus far. Quizma has fallen off the back of Austin just a little bit. Is that the breathing room Austin's needs to finish second in this race? Can Laurie McLaughlin, though, convert this to P5 and high silver?
Yeah, possibly so. Battle still up and down the field as we see here. Matt Campbell gaining on the back of Stephen Van Kampen coming up the hill. But Nico Kumpu's penalty, I beg your pardon, in the Aston Martin, I believe, was probably picked up at McLean's. By the time we cammed to him, he was coming through Coppice. So very easily around wide there. Jump on the power a little bit too early, drags you a little bit wide. Curb then drags you over onto the green stuff, and before you know it, he picked up a track cut penalty, and obviously very easy to do so at the S's, trying to jump all of the curbs. As we see here, the race leader, Rachinov, in the the number 24 McLaren 720S, has driven an absolutely superb race, absolutely fault-free, I believe, Jesse. I can't even picture a moment when he got tangled up with somebody else, or got slowed up by a slower car. Had an absolutely amazing pit stop as well to boot. So this man has pulled it back from the abysmal opening 2 rounds. It's great to see these guys, mentally resetting themselves for another round, knowing that, okay, I've had a stinker of round 1 and 2, but round 3 is a new round, and let's get going again. As Laurie McLaughlin there exercising all of the track limits, trying to find every inch they can behind Grim Lilith, but Grim is just driving away in that other McLaren of the 115. Very careful through here, Rachinov. Don't want to use too much curb, don't want to pick up possibly what would be that track limits as the white flag flies now. So we're on to our last lap. Timer hits 0 as Rachinov comes through the Melbourne hairpin. Very smooth exit out in towards Goddard's slightly slower car ahead. They'll probably go for another lap by. But this man hit drive through for Nicole Fox right as the timer hits 0. It's absolutely terrible, but this man here, Rachinov, takes the race win as we come back. A little weave celebratory there, flash of the headlights. Daniel Austins comes through in second. Nico Kuizma there in third. Les Stevenson's coming through to take the checkered flag on his run. Andy Boardman, someone we've not seen at all in this race, P4. Where did he come from, Jesse? Absolutely out of nowhere. And this man here, Ethan Scott, in the number 34, has turned his season on its head again and comes through to take the victory in silver class. Another celebratory weave there. Very similar celebrations from both McLaren drivers, but Nicole Fox, not electing to take the drive-through, takes a time penalty of plus 30, and we'll see how that phases into the results as everybody crosses the line there. Big gaggle of Astons of Jan Yao beating Stephen Van Kampen in the end. Matt Campbell within close enough range possibly of Nicole Fox to gain a position out of it. Martin Lawrence manages to get the Bentley into P13. Excellent drive from him. Very tricky conditions. And Tom Shipston here, our provisional championship leader, comes through to take 4th in silver. 5th eventually goes to Grim Lilith, who has done an absolutely outstanding job on controller in these conditions. Very, very tricky indeed. And Laurie McLaughlin comes through very, very close behind indeed. George Kwiatkowski in another McLaren 202 for Scotland comes across the line. A lot of these McLaren drivers electing for the weaving approach as they cross the line. George Kwiatkowski will be the final car across the line, and what a race, Jesse. Absolutely outstanding. A few drivers turning it on their heads. A few drivers that we were expecting to do very well haven't done so well, as the race results pop up here on your screen. And the one we're all looking for is Nicole Fox. As you see, she has dropped down into P14, which promotes Tom Shipston up another place as well. I believe Tom Shipston, that's bottom step of the podium for Tom, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is. Shipston has been promoted to 3rd place. That's exactly what Tom needed in that case, as everybody finishing up here. Ethan Scott, talking about putting a win on the board when you needed it, was on the verge of falling out of the conversation for the championship in 5th place, has won this race and thrown their name back in the ring. Shipston being promoted back to a podium has assured that they will likely keep the championship lead in the silver class. Daniel Austins didn't win the battle today, but he won the war by finishing 2nd. He'll likely get to keep his championship lead over Kuizma. And for Rachinov, I'm not certain, but I'm pretty sure that is the first overall victory for a Bulgarian driver in RCI history. Don't quote me on that, but I'm fairly confident that that is the first Bulgarian overall victory in the top split. Congratulations, Vincey. You deserve that. And a couple of other drivers that needed a race like they had. Of course, Mullard also up there as well. And a couple of drivers, of course, we saw them, John, struggle today. They'll be falling down the order.
Certainly a very mixed bag here today, Jesse. Some absolutely outstanding drives from various people up and down the grid, and especially congratulations to Rachinov in the first placed McLaren. As we see here, the number 12 of Nico Kuizma, bottom step of the podium, just behind Daniel Austins. So again, a great drive for Nico, keeping that championship fight well alive in Pro. But of course, Monday is not the only time we race here at RCI. We are next over to Wednesday, which is dedicated to our rookies, with the season ending at Spa this week, so one to keep your eye on there. Thursday Championship kicks off this week with round 1 at Barcelona. Pre-qualifying is still open for that one, so if you're looking to race somewhere on Thursday, get yourself signed up and get yourself in. Friday, of course, me and Jesse have casted it for 2 weeks now, but back to normal schedule, I believe, this week. We do follow the Fanatec European season, which has just left Paul Ricard as we just enter the town. So definitely one to keep out there. And Nora Rose obviously trying to keep their championship fight alive. But this Saturday, we of course have the big one at Barcelona for the World Tour for the penultimate round, which results in 6 hours of solid GT3 racing. So we'll be live on RCI TV as always. You can of course sign up and pre-qualify for any of these events at any time by visiting racerci.com. And a big thank you, of course, to our partners who help keep this alive. We have Race Department, which is your source of sim racing news and mods. AK Informatica for providing our server solutions here at RCI. Driver61.com. You can, of course, get 25% off your driver coaching by using our discount code, which you have a link in the description below. And head on over to driver61.com. Fanatec, your one-stop shop for the best sim racing equipment on the market. You can, of course, use our affiliate link in the description, and it won't cost you a single penny, but it does help us with the running costs here at RCI. Of course, everything done for free and off the generosity of the community. Sim Racing GP, lastly, frustrated of public lobbies? Hit up simracing.gp for quality community-based sim racing today. And again, just like RCI, completely free. So what more can you ask for? What a great race, Jesse. We saw some great drives up and down the grid. We saw some people that we thought maybe weren't quite on their pace, such as Tom Shipston, managed to reel it back in at the end. And of course, a great drive from Rachinov at the front of the grid. And I believe, Jesse, this will be our last time casting British Masters together, as I think we're back to normal next week with Ryan Gill.
Yeah, it certainly should be, John. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you fill in on Friday. And of course, it's been lovely to be here on Monday with you, returning the favor. And it's been fantastic. The races we've got to see over the last couple of weeks have been brilliant. Today was no different. It was always going to be like that today in the mixed conditions. There was going to be some drivers who rose to the occasions and some that got stung by it. We saw a little bit of both today. And what a fantastic story we'll have next week at Snetterton. I wonder what the weather conditions are going to be like there. I wonder what the racing will be like at Snetterton. Completely different animal than Donington today. And, well, even though I won't be on the microphone for that one, I certainly will be in the stands.
Yeah, certainly. A very tricky technical circuit is Snetterton. Very strange, again, very old school in the way it's laid out with lots of grass and big curbs. So join us again, same time next week. But from all of us here at a very soggy Donington, we hope you take care of yourselves and catch you next week at Snetterton, where we will see who can cement themselves into the championship lead. From myself, John Dalton, and from Jesse Lee, good night.